您知道中国人和犹太人都经常被形容是非常聪明的，比如中国学生会被形容成很擅长数学。那您怎样看待犹太人都是很聪明的呢？
So, of course, that's a myth. Jews are average. There are smart Jews. There are not so smart Jews. But where does the myth come from? It comes from the fact that there are some very, very famous, brilliant Jews, such as Karl Marx or Sigmund Freud or Albert Einstein, who made great contributions to humanity. Einstein is a very good case in point and is interesting because although he was not religious and did not adhere to the traditions in a strict sense, he identified very much in his heart with the Jewish people and with the cause of Zionism, which means the return to Jerusalem, which is Zion, that's another word for Jerusalem, and to the establishment of the modern state of Israel, which eventually happened in 1948. But already in the 1920s, he traveled from his home in Germany, where he worked and where his scientific research was, and he came to the United States with other Zionist leaders in order to raise money and support for the Zionist cause.
就像孙中山在20世纪早期来到美国筹集资金，也是为了支持中华民国。
Yes, it's like Sun Yat-sen, even though Einstein was not as politically important as Sun Yat-sen was in China. However, Einstein did have this strong connection with the state of Israel when it was created. However, he preferred to focus on his research, even though in 1953, Israel invited him to be the president of Israel, which was primarily a symbolic position, to be like an ambassador of the Jewish state. But Einstein declined, and he felt conflicted about this because obviously this would have been an important honor for him and it was an obligation for him, but he felt his main obligation was in his research.
哇，我从来都不知道爱因斯坦还被邀请过作为以色列总统呢。
Yes, he was very interesting, and of course he is exceptional. But the truth is that the myth that Jews are smart is probably a result of the fact that Jews emphasize education. And that is of supreme importance for every Jewish family to ensure that their children are as educated as possible. And this has been going on for centuries. The Jewish young boys were always taught the classical texts. And later on, they also learned texts in other languages and absorbed whether it was Greek or Arabic or German or English, and they became scholars as well. So in that respect, Judaism is similar to Confucian tradition, where it was so important for people, for young boys to learn. The truth is that Jewish girls were not educated typically until the 20th century, as I think it was in China as well. The girls did domestic chores, but in the 20th century, Jewish people and Chinese people started to educate women as well, and we have some very notable women scholars in our Jewish people. For example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court justice who recently passed away. And she was a member of a synagogue and also had verses from the Bible on her wall in her office, that the verses from the Bible that emphasize the importance of social justice and caring for the poor and underprivileged.
金斯伯格大法官原来也是犹太人啊，他在我们朋友圈里是非常有名的呢。
Yes, she is indeed very well known and very well liked in many quarters. Let me show you a book that we have in our family that my grandfather wrote. My grandfather's name was Dr. Moritz Zalman, and he wrote this book called Sein Kampf. Sein Kampf is an answer to Hitler's book, Hitler's manifesto, Mein Kampf. Now, my grandfather was an attorney in Austria in the 1920s and 30s, and he actually fought for the rights of elderly people who lost their pensions during the Depression. But in the 1930s, he started a political party against racial hatred. And his book was an answer to Hitler's Mein Kampf. And Hitler, in his book, argued that the Jews were parasites because they contributed nothing to society. And my grandfather, who was a very learned man, he was learned in the classical Jewish texts, but then he went to university and became an attorney. He wrote books about economics and about economic law, and he quoted many passages from the Jewish classical texts to disprove Hitler's views, but what's relevant for our discussion is that he compiled lists of Jews who made important contributions to the world in medicine, in literature, in art, in economics, and in science. And that was a demonstration of the fact that Jews have always contributed in learning to society. We didn't have a state, we didn't have political sovereignty, but we could contribute to the world in intellect and culture. Now, the Nazis invaded Austria in 1938, and my grandfather was public enemy number one. He was captured and he was put in a concentration camp. It was not possible to fight with the Nazis intellectually, and he was murdered in the concentration camp. Now, my oldest son did research about my grandfather to find out which concentration camp, and my son learned more about his political party, and in fact, next week they will be dedicating a memorial in Vienna, Austria, at my grandfather's office to show his contribution to the culture of Austria. But ultimately, he died, but he gave up his life for his ideals. And my children and I have gone back to the concentration camp, and we are very proud of his legacy and his intellectual and cultural legacy.
Well, 这是我第一次亲耳听到有关犹太人抵抗纳粹的故事，而且您爷爷的勇敢毅力还有智慧也确实让我感到非常敬佩。我想犹太人的抵抗，包括人类的发展，都在提醒我们不能忘记历史。